And if it's Friday and it's 1 o'clock, it's time for Nonprofit Insider.
Driving, music's blaring in my ears, engines roaring, the horizon's drawing.
Welcome to Nonprofit Insider. My name is David Unger, and I'm pleased to be hosting a show with executive directors and key people of local nonprofits. I myself have worked in the nonprofit world for over 30 years. In those years, I've realized that the majority of the community does not know about the organizations that provide such critical services and benefits to our community that we sometimes as a community take for granted. This is a chance to hear about the organizations that touch so many in our community. The opinions expressed on Nonprofit Insider are not necessarily those of WMPG, its staff and underwriters, or of USM. Last week, we announced that Representative Mike Michaud was going to be here. Unfortunately, Representative Michaud had an engagement in Washington he had to take off for, and we're very fortunate to have Ann Lynch, Executive Director of the Center for Grieving Children. Hi, Ann.
Hi. How are you doing, David?
Good. How are you?
Good.
First of all, thank you for coming in on short notice to talk with us today. So, the Center for Grieving Children, how would you describe it?
Well, it's an organization that has been in existence 26 years. We were the third center of its kind in the U.S., and we provide peer support, outreach, and education to children and their families who have had a death or there's a life-threatening illness in the family.
So when you talk about peer support and education, what do you mean?
Well, we have groups where we have trained volunteers from the community who facilitate the groups. And we have groups for adults and for children. We're a family model, so the whole family can come at the same time, and each family member can have their own peer support group where they get to meet other people who have had a similar experience, maybe also a similar loss. In those groups, they get to do a lot of activities, and that helps open the door for them to have conversation around what has happened, and they can share or not share depending on how they're feeling. But they get to experience what other people are hearing and feeling too. And so if they hear maybe that they're the only person in a classroom, we'll say in Gorham, and they get to meet another kid from Cape Elizabeth who's had a loss, and they realize they have similar challenges, whether it is to do with schoolwork, whether it's to do with friends, whether it's to do with things at home. So it's a great opportunity for them to experience that, breaking down the walls of isolation. The education that we have.
Let me just ask a question. So when you talk about isolation, do you find that children who experience a loss kind of go into a shell?
Not necessarily a shell, but they do withdraw somewhat, and they do have, some of them do have challenges at school. It is a challenging time, so it does help them. They get a chance to hear and speak their feelings, and it's an important time for them because they may have issues with their teacher, they may have issues with their friends, not understanding.
So I'm a social worker by training.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to make a safe guess maybe, and I could be totally wrong, that because the parents are going through so much themselves over a loss of a child or a loved one, that sometimes they miss these signals from the children, that the messages their kids may be giving them.
Correct. And the thing is, we have a kind of an expectation that children don't really grieve, and that they do. And we have found, going back to your comment, that the better the adult does, the better the children do.
So if the adult's not doing well, there's a good possibility that the child's not going to do well.
Correct.
And I'm sure the schools and some of the outside support systems are helpful, but not as intensely as you're describing it, that you do it.
Yes, schools are tasked with a lot of things, and they've got a curriculum to cover. So, it is hard for them to devote a lot of time to a particular child who may be having these issues, and maybe it will go to the social worker. But the children don't like getting singled out, so they may not kind of raise a flag that they're struggling.
And I'm sorry, I interrupted, but you were going to talk about education now.
Yes, with education, we provide workshops, and we go out to schools, talk to crisis teams, help them when there's an issue in the school about what to watch out for, different steps to take, things to avoid.
And how did you get involved with this? This is a pretty intense job.
I actually was a parent that took my children to the centre when my 10-year-old daughter died suddenly.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. I was, as you can vouch, I have an accent. I was only 2 years here from Ireland, and my support network was pretty slim here. And so, hearing about the centre, I sought it out, and the centre also came to the school, which was how I really heard about it. And they were excellent in terms of helping the students, because my daughter died of something that was really sudden. It was a virus, and so it was a very scary time for people to know how she caught the virus and all of that. So when we accessed the centre, when I was in my own adult group, one of the things that really spoke out to me, apart from being with other adults, was also because we talked a lot about the challenges, with raising a grieving child, but also the volunteers who were facilitating the group. It just blew me away that people from the community would give up their time to be with you when you're in a very sad and, deep place. So it stuck with me, and then I eventually sought it out and became a volunteer.
So you've used volunteers a lot since in the couple minutes we've been talking. So the center is comprised of a lot of volunteers?
Yes, without volunteers we couldn't function.
And how many do you have?
We have, if we count our board, we have close to 150 volunteers. Wow. About 125 of those are working with families, working directly in the peer support groups. We've got groups going 4 nights a week and 3 afternoons, and we've also got a location in Sanford. So we've a lot happening.
Wow. So the volunteers, I'm sure, go through an intensive training program?
They go through a 30-hour training where the big piece of it is they are learning, obviously, about children and grief and adults and grief, but also how to facilitate a group, and also hearing stories, how they're going to be impacted by that, how your self-care. One of the things the centre does that really helps take care of the volunteers is we provide what's called pre-group before they go into group with the families. So on a typical night, a volunteer would arrive at 6 o'clock, and from 6 to 7 they have their own peer support group. And getting downsides from their day and so they'll be ready and clear and open to be with the families. And then when the families leave, they have another hour where they are processing maybe how they were impacted by the evening and maybe any challenges they might have had for themselves. Not about the details of what happened in the group, because that's confidential, but about, dealing with a particular child, maybe coping skills, some ideas for activities, that kind of thing, if the kids were particularly active. And the whole idea being that they're not taking this home with them. And we ask for a commitment of a year. And the reason we do that is because there's a lot of changes happening in a family, and we don't want to be adding to it. And they get very attached to the volunteers, and particularly we find where the loss is the loss of a dad. They seem to identify very much with our male volunteers, and many people stay much longer than that.
I was going to ask you that. So if you ask for a minimum of a year, what would you say the average stay is?
The average is about 4 years for some people.
Well, that's something to be recognized.
Isn't that something to be recognized? And we have people who are there 8 and 10 years. We have one person who's been involved since the very beginning, since the founding of the centre. Wow. He's now he's 81, but he still might substitute on a night if they needed a volunteer. So when people get connected to the mission, they really get involved with the community that's at the centre. We have a great sense of community.
I find that a lot of nonprofits don't utilize our senior volunteers as effectively as they could. I was working with a Cub Scout program once in Texas, and we had a unique piece where we had den granddads. And I had a 92-year-old come to the den meeting every week. He would walk in, throw a handful of candy up in the air, watch all the kids just break their routine, and then leave. But it was his shtick. So.
Right. And they do need that person in their lives, because we also now have a lot of children who are being caretaken by their grandparents.
Right.
So it is.
So what do you think one of the biggest challenges you face as an executive director of an agency like this?
Well,
besides funding, because
sure,
everybody knows that.
Sure. I think it is, there are so many things that you got to kind of be aware of, and not that you can be an expert in all of them, because that's why you've got a board of directors to help you with that. But I guess it's to know so much, about a little bit about everything.
Right.
So
that's been a common theme that a lot of executives have brought to the show, that you have to know a little bit about everything just to keep your head above water.
Right. A bit like an entrepreneur. I mean, but they don't necessarily have a board of directors that they can rely on. So,
is recruiting of volunteers difficult? Or is the word of mouth really kind of bringing everybody in at this point?
In this area, in the Cumberland County area, it's our current and past volunteers are fantastic ambassadors for us. So we do have a pretty good network and a supply of volunteers. But we've opened a new location down in Sanford. And so we're busily trying to get the word out and to get volunteers there to start, to help with this new program.
So at this point in the show every week, I do ask our guests a trivia question, and I ask that they, when Ann walked in, we have a 15-minute sound check before the show. Ann walked in and says, "I'm ready for the trivia questions."
I don't know about that.
I know. In all honesty, I had trouble researching trivia questions based on the kind of work you do, so this one's going to be totally off the wall.
Okay.
And I thought I would lighten it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. How many amusement parks are there in the United States?
Oh, my goodness.
So before you give me your answer, we're going to take a little break. This is WMPG, and I'm David Unger on Nonprofit Insider. WMPG can be heard at 90.9 in southern Maine and eastern New Hampshire. And today we have Ann Lynch, Executive Director of the Center for Grieving Children. Do you have your answer?
Maybe 5,000?
5,000. Not close. According to the International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions, there are more than 400 amusement parks and attractions in the United States. And in 2010, approximately 290 million people visited amusement parks.
I thought there would be more than that.
Yeah, so that's a bunch of useless information. So, the Center for Grieving Children, you have all kinds of programs and different groups for different people. Are you finding with the military right now, there's a upswing in military families who are using your services?
We do have some, but it's a small percentage. I think Maine has been relatively lucky in terms of, the number of people that have died in service. We do have a program for refugees and immigrants, newly arrived children, and we also provide, groups for children where there's a life-threatening illness. So we've a number of programs where we work with different categories of children.
How does the center accommodate? And I know you deal with people as a whole, but different religions and different traditional groups have different philosophies on death and dying. How does that mold into a community-based organization? Well,
we have respect for all types, and if a question like that comes up in the group, we usually say to them that that's a discussion to have with their parents. What might end up happening is somebody else might say, well, I've got a different view on that, and that allows us to say there are many religions and many different aspects to beliefs, and all have their basis, and to talk with their parents about it.
Do you find that the multicultural program brings a different dynamic to it?
It does. But what's a little different about our multicultural program is that the parents are not coming at the same time. We have a collaboration with Portland Public Schools, so the kids are coming after school, and they're arriving by bus with maybe a teacher, and they spend an hour and a half at the center. And so these kids already have made connections at school. I think one of the challenging things for them is that they're mixing with, when they go back home, there are different groups that they have issues with, and so the children are trying to cross those barriers. And
describe that a little bit, if you could.
Well, there are different, I use the word sect, it probably isn't the right word, but they have different beliefs, and so they may have been fighting with one another in their country of origin. So when they relocate here, they have to learn, that this is a new setting and how to navigate that relationship.
So on top of dealing with the grief and the life changes that they're going through, they also have to figure out how to get used to living in the United States.
It's a huge learning curve for them. They are also being in a different school setting, new culture. Do
you find the family is supportive of this, or they're just kind of saying, okay, take care of my kid?
The families are very, very supportive of anything that's going to help their child in school. They have a great sense of what they want, more for their children and their children to achieve more. And so they're very supportive of our program. The school supports our program, and so therefore they're in favor of it. Right. And in the very beginning, when they didn't really know us, now the program is about 16 years old, it was important that the school principal kind of endorsed the program. So if you had to describe one program, and I know that's difficult, that really made a difference in the community or an individual, what would that program be and why? Well, I guess the most immediate one is what I referred to earlier, is our new program down in York County, where we provide for one night a week, we provide bereavement peer support services for the families. And so these are families who would not have been able to come up to Portland, and challenges in terms of transport, in terms of cost of transport. So, you get to see the ripple effect, you get to see in a smaller setting how important that is in a community. And not that we don't hear that here in Portland, we do, but it's just when I think of a new program, right. That's what I want to kind of promote. All of our programs, just like your children, they're all fantastic programs. But for a new program, that's where I see, you have challenges, and so it's important to promote it as much as you can. I just lost my train of thought. Do you have any questions for me? And I'll come back. I was wondering what you have in terms of your prediction for nonprofits in the future, what their challenges are going to be. That might be different from now. Whoa. When I work with a client, we talk about how the organization paradigms have to really shift. Okay, that sometimes the traditional role of the board won't work in today's society. How we use volunteers, and I think that the model that you're using volunteers with, in terms of very specific tasks versus generalization, is the way that people go. People have very limited time constraints at this point. Yes. So they want to be able to come in and say, I'll do A, B, C, or D, and then leave. You don't have that kind of sense of ownership for the overall agency. You have a sense of ownership for a specific program or project. And I think that organizations, to really maintain itself, have to begin changing how they look at that. That kind of model is there. And even on the funding side, that you have to begin looking at your overall funding sources and how does that affect the segmented piece. You still need the overall piece of what your mission and vision is and how you're doing it. But
how you begin approaching programs as a segmentation versus an overall organizational piece. Did that make sense?
So you think we have a good model then?
I think you do, and I've been following you for a couple years, so I've always been impressed with the model that you bring to the table, so yes.
And it's, another important piece of that is everybody's view, respecting their view and their belief in the mission and how you can nurture that.
Right.
So I sometimes refer to that the centre is like a house of cards. If you don't have that foundational respect for what the volunteers do, you don't have a program.
Right. And, when you said listening to what people said, I've been waiting for an opening to give one of my favorite quotes, and you just gave it to me.
Good.
Cy Seymour said, you don't make a good pickle by squirting vinegar on it. You make a good pickle by putting the cucumber in the vinegar and letting it soak and absorb. So, and I look at nonprofits the same way. It's all about building relationships. And the more relationships you build within the community, your board, your volunteers, the stronger the organization is overall. And again, that's my opinion and not WMPG's or anybody else's, but that's mine as a consultant. My question came back to me.
Yes.
Is the center part of a national program, a national movement?
Yes, we are. Actually, I was part of a founding group that started a national alliance for grieving children. And where it came up as, we meet once a year as a symposium, and we had been doing that for a number of years. And every time we would get together, we would say, we must have a national voice. And so eventually we got together and started it, and now it has funding through New York Life, and we now have an executive director, and we have
that's
a
great
voice.
stuff.
And it also is able to secure funding so that we can encourage more centres to open their doors and to provide services for children. So at this point, we have over 300 centres in the US, and so we're hoping that there will be more. For me, where it became really obvious that we needed a national voice was after 9/11, when my colleagues were busy trying to provide support for the families in New York, that I felt really they shouldn't have to be worrying about trying to find funding at the same time, that maybe there is an organisation that can step in and help as well to help them secure funding so that they could do the work that they're set up to do.
Is fundraising difficult for your organization? You would think that you would just say what you do and people would say, here.
Well, I think what is important about our mission is that it surpasses everybody. It's something everybody experiences. So you're right. People can identify with it, and in actual fact can kind of say, well, how do you do that work?
Well, if I were a donor right now and you wanted to ask me for money, what would you tell me? What would you ask me?
What would I ask you?
Yeah. Make a solicitation.
Okay. We're a centre in Portland and in Sanford providing peer support for children and families where there's been a death or there's life-threatening illness. And we have found through research that 1 in 7 children will experience a death of somebody close to them. And that figure rises if the caregiver is a grandparent. So there's a great need for the services, and we provide them free. And we do not receive
free? You don't charge anybody for any of this?
We don't charge anybody for this. And the reason being the families have already experienced, they've either gone through long periods in hospital before the person died, they have a lot of medical bills, maybe the breadwinner of the family is the person that has died, so they're busy reconfiguring, maybe the mom has to go back out to work. So there's a lot happening for the family when the death happens or when the illness has been diagnosed, that it's nice to have one place to come. And I think it also adds to the beauty of the model, that it really is the community taking care of members of the community.
If you would close your doors tomorrow, how many people would be affected?
Well, we last year we served over 400 people, a direct service. We fielded over 1,000 phone calls where we provide support to families, and we reached over 2,000 through our outreach in schools. So a lot of people would be impacted.
And if someone wanted to make a donation or contact you, how would they do that?
Well, our phone number is 775-5216, and we have a website that is cgcmaine.org.
And you can always use more volunteers, right?
Always use more volunteers. And if there's anybody in the York County listening, we really need volunteers in York County. So,
If you had to tell our listeners one last thing, what would it be?
Oh my goodness.
Because this is it.
Oh, you really stymied me. Well, I think just that children do grieve. It's important to watch what they do. And, you know, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, call the Centre for Grieving Children. We're there to provide that, and we're there to provide support in any format.
With all volunteers and no fees charged.
No fees charged.
That's great. Well, Anne, thank you for being on the show.
Thank you.
Next week, we have Tom Bickford. I don't know how many of you know or have heard of Tom Bickford, but Tom is the executive director of Maine Robotics. So we're going to be switching gears a little bit. The music appears courtesy of Mike Hubbard. You can find it on www.michaelhubbardmusic.com. Check out Mike's website to see where he's playing this weekend. Thanks to Deb Danger, MPI's executive engineer. You can catch Deb on Morning Street Fridays at 6:30. If you know of a nonprofit that would like to be on the show, please email me at npi@davidunger.net. Past shows are archived at www.tcmgr Nonprofit Insider tab.